going to introduce our speaker for the day. Hi, this is Dr. Laura Zettel-Watson. She is a professor of psychology and the coordinator of aging studies at Cal State Fullerton. In addition, she is teaching and mentoring both graduate and undergraduate students. Dr. Zettel-Watson is a member of the Fibromyalgia and the Chronic Pain Center and the Center of Successful Aging, and of course the Health Promotions Research Institute. She's conducted and published research relating to several areas of gerontology health, including cognitive aging, social relationships, and the role of assistive technology in improving health. She lives here in Fullerton with her husband and her 2 children, and is grateful for all the support that makes her busy life possible. And she's a frequent flyer here with OLLI, and so I'd like to now introduce you to Laura Zettel-Watson. Thank you, Dr. Watson.
Good morning. Thank you, Ellie. Hi, everyone. How are you this morning on this lovely Saturday? There we go. All right. As always, I love coming to talk to OLLI. It's way more fun when we can do it in person, but I appreciate you coming to Zoom today, especially on a Saturday. I wanted to chat with you about something a little different. The last couple times I've been here, I've talked about sort of social relationships and social trends, talked about isolation during COVID. And this time I actually have some hot off the press research findings from a technology study that we've done. So I wanted to, you're the first to hear about this. So I wanted to kind of take a little bit of time and tell you about what we've got going on in our study. I'm going to start just by kind of giving the context for why we started looking at what we were looking at, some of the aging trends that are going on in our country, as well as the health and chronic condition trends, how that all plays into our current healthcare system and the problems that that causes for us, some of the social network trends that play into this, that really kind of create what I call the perfect storm of us needing more help from somewhere. And that's where technology utilization may come in. So my research team and I conducted a research study around technology utilization for healthcare. So I'll give you some of the findings from that, and then talk a little bit about the benefits of using technology or the barriers that might prevent people from using, and sort of end with an idea of what all this means and what the implications are for our future. So I'm going to start by looking at some of the changing demographics that we're seeing in the US. And most of you are well aware at this point that our population is aging. By 2030, when the last of the baby boomers, right, that's the group born between 1946 and 1964, by 2030, the last of them will reach the age of 65. And that's going to leave us with about 1 in 5 Americans, 20% of our population. That's over 70 million people in this country will be over the age of 65. The oldest group among seniors, those over the age of 85, are actually the fastest growing segment of the US population. So over the last couple of decades, the population of the 85 and older crowd has actually increased by over 200%. So it's the fastest growing segment of the US population. So if you couple these trends with the fact that the majority of aging Americans want to remain in their homes for as long as possible, you know, it's about 75% of us want to stay in our homes for as long as we can. And we find that that desire only increases as we get older. So we've got a growing group of aging individuals who want to be able to stay at home for as long as possible. But unfortunately, you know, we've got to take our health trends into consideration. And many aging adults suffer from poor health conditions that are resulting in, you know, people living longer, but with a higher degree of functional limitation. And this often impairs our independent living. So we've got, among people 65 and older, 84% suffer from at least one chronic condition. About half have 2 or more chronic conditions. And about 1 in 5 people over 65 in our country have some degree of disability in performing what we call our activities of daily living. Activities of daily living are the basic activities that we need to be able to perform in order to function in our own household. In fact, on our own. So this includes things like bathing and dressing ourselves, eating and transitioning from a bed to a chair. About 20% of people over 65 in this country have some level of difficulty with those tasks. And estimates suggest that about 30% or more than 30% of Americans over 65 need some assistance to be able to remain in the community. What that means in their own homes, not in an institutionalized setting. So we're seeing aging Americans with a higher probability of having a condition that's creating some level of functional impairment, and that is requiring some level of assistance. So we've got more people who need assistance, but increased assistance and healthcare access is going to be complicated by the current state of our healthcare system. We've got decreased availability of formal healthcare support. One of the ways that you're probably seeing this directly translating into your life is the face-to-face time that you might be able to get with your physician or your specialist. This is due to rising insurance costs, decreased Medicare funding. Physicians are increasingly limited in the amount of time that they're actually allowed to spend with each patient. This is particularly true for Medicare reimbursement. In a lot of cases, physicians might be expected to see, 5 or 6 patients an hour, which may translate to only about 10 minutes for you to get all of your health concerns discussed with that individual. And with increasing numbers of chronic conditions, people having more than one, that's just not enough time to have all of our needs met. So, in essence, demands for healthcare services are starting to outweigh our available resources. And so, what this means is that many aging individuals are going to have to fill these gaps by relying on informal support. So, turning away from the formal support of the healthcare system and relying on informal support. And this often comes from friends and family members instead of from our healthcare providers. However, if you've attended any of my previous talks, you'll know that as we age, we tend to have fewer informal supports available. So we know that there are a lot of changes to our social network with age. A lot of people will experience a decline in their number of network members. Now, from a support perspective, the decline doesn't always mean a bad thing. Oftentimes, that means we're kind of pruning the peripheral relationships and keeping the really good ones. But we still are seeing individuals compared to prior generations having fewer supports available. So this can be due to factors such as divorce and widowhood or never marrying, where we have fewer people with spouses as they age. We also have a trend that is continuing into subsequent generations where people are having fewer children or even not having children. So we are seeing more people than ever who are aging alone in terms of a living status, where they don't have a spouse or children. If they do have children, they may be geographically remote, so not available for day-to-day assistance or to be able to provide any kind of meaningful help. Currently, we see more than a quarter of adults over 65 in this country live alone, and that number increases with each passing year. So we are moving in a trend of seeing, more individuals finding themselves living on their own in later life. And so all of these pieces together, the population aging that we talked about on the first slide, the prevalence of chronic conditions, the rising number of functional limitations that individuals are experiencing, and then the decline in the healthcare provision in this country. All three of those things, if you take them all together, kind of create this perfect storm for us, where there's clearly a vital expanding service gap, where we anticipate in the coming years that individuals over the age of 65, particularly those over 75 and even more so those over 85, are going to be in a position where they have more needs than they can have met by the existing healthcare system. So this brings us to this possibility that everyday technology that already exists in our lives may help to facilitate our overall health and well-being. among aging Americans. So this is kind of where my research team has really found our interest area, is in this sort of perfect storm zone where we're saying, okay, time is ripe for trouble if we don't come up with alternatives for people to be able to access the support and the care that they need. And so, what might the role of everyday technology be in this situation? I wanted to pause and see if anybody has any questions so far related to the rationale. So we were interested in looking at the role of everyday technology. So you've probably heard, obviously, of some really amazing technologies out there, robots that can clean your house and, make you breakfast and do all those crazy things. We're not talking about the technology that's costing tens of thousands of dollars. We're talking about the stuff that we have in our everyday possession. So the majority of Americans at this point have access to things like mobile devices, whether these are laptop computers, um, tablets, phones. We have internet access, email, video chat software like Skype and FaceTime and Zoom. We have our smartphones, which basically put all of these things into the palm of our hands. We have mobile applications, all of the different apps. I this morning have already used my Fitbit app and my what's the other one called? See, I can't even remember the names of my all these apps. My Fitness Pal. I have weight gurus that talk to my scale. I've got all these other types of apps. And social networking platforms. This is your Facebook and your Instagram and your LinkedIn and all of the other types of platforms that you may be participating in. So all of these different types of everyday technology are these devices and services that most Americans now have easy access to. And technology traditionally, we know, has impacted older adults more in the realm of medical treatment. So there's been a lot of studies that have looked at how technology can assist in terms of medical treatment. But a growing body of literature is showing that everyday technology can help to enhance and facilitate health and independence, which is really, really helpful for a population who wants to be able to stay at home for as long as possible while still uh, dealing with those chronic conditions. Technology's also been shown to promote supportive relationships. So it's possible for us to continue to have supportive relationships for people on the other side of the country or even the other side of the world because of technology. So my research team and I wanted to know more about how these everyday types of technology, the things that we have at our disposal already, how those types of technology can be used to meet our healthcare needs specifically. So we have recently put together a manuscript. It's currently under peer review. It's the health-related technology use and daily experiences in adulthood. And we created a national profile from MIDAS, which is the Midlife in the United States national study. So my research team consists of me, along with many of you have probably met Dr. Melanie Horn-Mallers. She's a faculty member in Huser and the Associate Coordinator of Aging Studies on our campus. And then one of our former students, Amanda Puccelli, who has her master's in occupational therapy and is a practitioner now, and a handful of our colleagues from around the country in Utah, at Brandeis, at Penn State. So this has been a collaborative effort from multiple faculty from around the country, kind of really taking a close look at what the profile of everyday technology for health purposes might look like. And our goal of designing this study was to create a comprehensive portrait or a profile of the health and then kind of the daily context surrounding the use of technology specifically for health related purposes. So again, we were getting very specific. We weren't looking at people using technology or their smartphone to find a restaurant for dinner. We were looking specifically at using technology for health related purposes. So that was our specific goal. And to do this, we turned to a national study on midlife in the United States. So that's called MIDAS, for Midlife in the United States. MIDAS has been surveying thousands of Americans via telephone and mail for several decades now. The NSDE is an in-depth daily diary study that targets a subset of the mitis population. So the NSDE, which stands for National Study of Daily Experiences, does nightly telephone calls for this subset of mitis participants across 8 days to assess participants' daily health, mood, stress levels. My research team was able to add a health and technology assessment that we created to the final night's interview protocol of the NSDE. So Melanie Mallers and I came up with that. Dave Almeida, one of our co-authors, he is the principal investigator on the NSDE, and he allowed us to put our questions into onto the last night of that daily diary assessment. And the participants who completed our health technology assessment then obviously also completed the NSDE, and they were part of the parent mitis study. So we have access to multiple dimensions and variables related to their psychosocial and physical well-being. So this really kind of gave us, here at Cal State Fullerton with no funding, still gave us access to a national level data set and a rich amount of data and information on individuals from across the country. So we ended up with, for our particular piece of the study, 198 adults in the US who ranged in age from 55 to 75. The average age of participants was about 65. They were about half female, the majority were white, and about 2/3 were married. The remaining were divorced or single. The average annual income of our participants was about 76,000. That's household income. So it looks fairly similar to the profile of adults in this age group across the US. So this is a set of measures that we used specific to our particular investigation. These are the different variables that we included. Participants were first asked whether they used any of the following technology for health-related activities over the past week. So to assess types of technology, they were asked if they use any of the following. They could say yes to all of them, no to all of them, yes to one or two. It's basically one by one. Do you use this type of technology? Again, specific to health, so health-related purposes. If they say yes to any of these, so if they said yes to phone, they would then be asked for what purpose. And then again, if they said yes to email, they'd be asked again for what purpose. So for any positive responses on the use question, the follow-up assessed their purposes of use. And purposes included things like monitoring a health condition. This can include using an insulin tracker, if that is something, using a blood pressure cuff if you're monitoring hypertension. So using monitoring a health condition using tech. Monitoring a health behavior. So those are some of the things that I mentioned just this morning. I used my Fitbit to see how many hours of sleep I got last night. It's never enough. As well as using my Fitness Pal to track my breakfast. So those are ways of monitoring a health behavior. Communicating with a social network. This was specific to health behavior, but if I post something on my Facebook page, for example, that says, with a picture and says, does anyone know what this rash is? And send it out to my social network, that's me using my social network to communicate with those folks. Did I communicate with family member, friend, or caregiver about my health? Did I reach out and communicate with my healthcare provider? Healthcare provider in this context can include anyone that the person deems as related to healthcare. So it can be my physician, my nurse practitioner, my pharmacist, my therapist, my holistic medicine provider, my acupuncturist, whatever I deem to be my healthcare. And then the last one is, did I use any of these types of technology for making appointments, getting test results, refilling prescriptions, or seeking basic information about health? So if I looked up that rash on WebMD, then I would be using technology for a health-related purpose. So these are the two main categories of questions that we added to the NSDE section of the study. We also had a variety of predictors at our disposal that came from either the parent Midas study or the daily diary NSDE. And some of these factors include a body mass index, whether or not the individual had chronic conditions, if they were experiencing pain, self-reported health, so kind of a subjective assessment of how they're feeling, if they have any health symptoms, whether or not they smoke, how much exercise they get, if they consume alcohol or how much, their average amount of sleep, as well as some of the daily ideas of, are they experiencing stress or how much social support are they exchanging? So all of these pieces really kind of allowed us to examine the health and daily context that might be associated with health-related technology use. Questions on the study design before I tell you anything about results? There's a question.
Marion Shane, is that how you pronounce it?
Does a telephone count as technology?
Yes. So telephone would be under the top phone. And I have phone because it's telephone or mobile phone. But either way, we would count that. Yes.
Okay.
Monica Broom,
What was socioeconomic conditions taken into consideration?
That's a great question. We did have at our baseline, we looked at things like gender, age, socioeconomic status. We used as our proxy variables, education and income. So those were kind of the two pieces that were considered from a socioeconomic perspective. And we, in this group, because if you recall, we did have a fairly, oops, I passed it. Our income was actually quite high on average. 76,000 was our household income, which is several thousand over the US median. So probably the reason we did not see socioeconomic status as a significant predictor was because we had a fairly high level of income in our group. As far as that goes, so we didn't have enough variability to really see. Studies that do have a great deal of variability do find that income and education are both predictors of technology use. So you are absolutely correct. We didn't see that in our sample because it wasn't varied enough, but generally that is exactly what people find. People are more likely to adopt technology if they have a higher income. They get the newer toys faster. They feel more comfortable adopting it. They can pay for training, as well as individuals with higher education. We see having higher adoption of technology. Great question.
Dr. Watson, there was a question, what does SD mean?
Oh, that's a great question. My apologies. SD is standard deviation. So when we're talking about the average age, for example, is 64.71. That means that that's the mean. And then the standard deviation around that mean is 5.45. So if we had a normally distributed sample, that would suggest that the average age is 65 and with a standard deviation of around to 5. That means that about 2/3 of our people are between 60 and 70 years old. So you can kind of make assumptions. The standard deviation tells you the spread. Age is kind of very tightly spread. It's not a wide spread around the mean. Income, on the other hand, is very widely spread. So the standard deviation of income is really big, which means that there are some people on the very low end, and they're probably because there are lots of people with $200,000, $300,000 a year incomes that skew this and make the standard deviation much higher. Did that answer that question?
there are no further questions in chat.
All right, thank you so much. So to walk you through what some of our results are, and this looks like a lot of information, but I'll show you it's actually quite easy to read. What you're looking at here in this table is the gender profile of health-related technology use. The top half in the blue shows the types of technology used. So these are those things: the telephone, texting, email, social network sites, internet, mobile applications. These were the top 6. We actually removed a few things from our analysis because they were used by fewer than 2 people. That includes, what were they, blog postings, and another one was instant messaging. So those were originally asked about, but they weren't used by this age group. As you can tell, so we've got the percentages in this column right here show overall. So in our sample, men and women combined, the greatest amounts of use came in internet and telephone. So about 1/3 of our sample used both internet and phone in terms of their health-related technology. This was followed by email, and then by social networking and mobile applications, and only a handful of folks were using texting. In terms of some of the gender differences, ignore the standard deviation columns. You don't need that information right now. But just looking at, this is the means for each, these can actually be thought of as percentages. So because I'm showing standard deviation, I didn't do them as percentages because then it doesn't make sense statistically. But you can, because it was coded 0 and 1, this is basically a percentage. So 24% of men use the phone for health-related purposes, 43% of women. So these notations on the side show us our significance level. So these variables are the significant ones, and at either a p is 0.1 or 0.05. So very significant was the gender difference in phone use. Women were way more likely to use telephone. And they were also more likely to send text messages than men, as well as using social networking sites. So these were the places where we saw gender differences. And in all places where we saw them, telephone, texting, social network sites, it was women using those technologies more frequently than the men were. The bottom half of this chart shows the purposes for technology use. So on this one, the most common purpose for utilizing technology was managing healthcare appointments and information. So over 1/3 of our participants, that was their purpose for utilizing technology. So this is going to your online health profile, or it's emailing the physician, or requesting a refill of prescription online, those kinds of things. Health communication with family, friends, and caregiver was the next most common, followed by communicating with your healthcare provider. And then kind of bringing up the rear were folks using this technology for communicating with their social network, monitoring their health condition, or monitoring a health behavior. And in terms of gender differences here, the only one we saw was in communicating with family, friends, and caregivers. Almost half of the women who were utilizing technology for health were using it to communicate with a friend, family, or caregiver, as opposed to only about 1/3 of the men. So that was a place where we saw a significant gender difference. Questions on this chart?
Could you just take just a second and kind of explain your codes on the side, the significance codes, I think they are,
Yep.
the asterisks? And
Yes, indeed. We, for these tests, did an analysis called a Mancova, which is a multivariate analysis of covariance. That's basically a fancy way of saying we were looking at a variety of outcome variables, which were these guys, predicted by, or whether there was a difference between men versus women. And that type of statistical test basically looks at these averages, and the standard deviation is needed to do this test, because if there's a great deal of variability, differences won't be significant. I'm trying to find an example there. These are all pretty similar in their variability, but high. So here's an example. There's an 8% difference point in health communication with provider. And clinically, that sounds like it should be significant. Women are doing this 8% more than men are. But because the variability is so high, it wasn't found to be significant. In other situations, this is a good one, there's only, oh, no, I guess this is 12%. This is only a 7%. What am I looking at? Yeah, no, this is 7% difference in the averages, but the variability is lower. So this 7% was significant, whereas this 8% down here was not, because the variability was almost twice as high. So it's a statistical test that takes that into consideration. And the lower your p-value, which is the probability of this happening by chance. So in this situation, the probability of these differing by chance is less than 0.01. So fewer than 1 in 100 times would these differences exist by chance. And so that's very significant, and we can put a lot of stock in these answers or these value differences. This is about a 1 in 10% chance. So it's not as significant as this one, but it still says there's only a 1 in 10% chance that this is a fake difference. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that answered my question. So.
Great. Now, these are awesome questions. So any other questions about our findings in terms of who's using what and why they're using it?
Russ has a question.
Oh, yes, please, Russ.
Yeah, these, I realize these numbers here are for health related purposes for technology. It seems like they seem a lot lower than the percentages I would think for just other uses for this technology. Do you know why that is for the health related? It seems like the usage is a lot smaller or less frequent than it would be for other uses for people at this age group.
Yeah, I think you're right on. We know for a fact that probably close to 100% of this age group are using the telephone, period. But only a third of them are when they're using the phone. And remember, this was a question that was asked in that daily diary. So in this case, it was asked over the past week. So during that daily diary period, or 8-day period, over the past week, did you use the telephone related to your health in some way? So it was taking a snapshot of a particular week in time, not have you ever used the phone for health technology. So probably if we said, did you use a telephone this week? 100% of people would have said yes. And then if we followed up and said, but did you, when you used the phone, were you doing something with your health? And only a third of people endorsed that. So I think it's probably because, for some of these people, they didn't have a health thing going on that week, or, they used a different type of technology. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I can see it now because the range is kind of narrow, 1 week range. If it were a larger range, like a month, then the percent would be higher, evidently.
I agree. And I think if we had said, have you ever, then these numbers would be quite high. But, telephone is obviously the highest. Internet is something else that about 80% of people over 65 are using the internet. So, we've got those kinds of things, but very few compared to phone and internet usage, a lot fewer older adults are on social network sites. So it makes sense that those numbers would be less because not everyone is on Facebook, whereas everyone does use the telephone. Same with mobile apps. People may use a home phone, but not a smartphone. So those are the types of things that, the reasons why we see some of those smaller levels.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. So once we kind of had an idea of who was using what and what they were using it for, we then wanted to kind of make a comparison between people who were using technology and those who were not. And again, remember that this is technology in the last 8 days specific to health. So the technology users, the column of interest is this mean in the middle of both. These were the numbers that we compared using that same type of test. Got cut off a little, sorry. The same type of test used to compare these. And we used a variety of health variables to predict. So body mass index was a significant predictor. Individuals who were technology users on average had a significantly higher BMI than those who were not technology users. Similarly, those who use technology had significantly more, about one more on average, chronic health conditions compared to those who were not tech users. So those with chronic health conditions and higher BMIs were more likely to use technology than their counterparts with lower BMI and fewer chronic conditions. No differences in terms of their scores on daily pain, how they rated their physical health, or the number of symptoms they endorsed for the day. If we look at specific health behaviors, we similarly see the only one that was predictive was exercise. So in this particular question, in this case, exercise was measured by hours spent on physical activity. Individuals who were tech users had significantly fewer hours of exercise daily compared to their counterparts who were not users. But there were no differences in smoking, alcohol consumption, or hours of sleep per night. When we looked at some of the psychosocial factors, this is where we saw a lot of our bigger differences. We found that people who were tech users experienced more stress on a daily basis and received less social support. So the tech users in some cases seem to have a need because they had more going on and fewer people to assist. So those are kind of our overall findings when we were looking at the health and psychosocial predictors of technology use. So to summarize our results, our study revealed several demographic characteristics associated with health technology use among adults between the ages of 55 and 75. And the benefit of this was it was from a national sample using daily diary methodology. So those are both considered benefits in terms of our study design. Telephone and internet use telephone and internet were used more often. And the primary motives were managing healthcare appointments and information, as well as communicating with family, friends, or caregivers about one's health. With the growing availability of telehealth and telemedicine in terms of websites and platforms, healthcare delivery is becoming increasingly efficient. And many of you have probably really noticed that during this pandemic period where, a lot of our physicians and specialists have moved to telehealth, where you're doing a lot of appointments now, things that we'd never done before using technology. A lot of people are preferring that now because it allows you to conduct these checkups and visits from the safety of your own home. Those things, the pandemic kind of forced all of that into action. And we even see insurance companies kind of scrambling to cover this kind of care. I know in the mental health arena, telehealth rarely had been reimbursed before from a therapist perspective. And now all the insurance companies have had to scramble to cover that kind of health. And I feel like we probably won't go back to the previous model for everybody. A lot of people will grow comfortable with telemedicine and telehealth, and we'll see a lot of these things remaining with us even post-pandemic. So these really enable access to more and more adults, particularly aging adults who may have issues with transportation or mobility. So telehealth and telemedicine are becoming really increasingly efficient and available to more folks. However, we are aware that the digital health divide, that's the gap between those with health technology access and those without, that still exists among older adults. And that gap is bigger among older folks than it is among younger. So even as we see a year after year increase in the number of older users of technology, we're still seeing a big gap in access. So we still have the haves and the have-nots, if you will, in terms of who has access to health technology. And there are a lot of, in terms of where this comes from, why does that exist? The benefits increase over time as technology becomes more inexpensive, it becomes more accessible. So as we find ways to make smartphones, for example, as competitors can come out with smartphones that cost only a couple $100s instead of a couple $1,000, that's going to open the market to more people. So as things become more widely available, we anticipate more users. We do know that the majority of individuals who stick with a technology after they experience that learning curve, which we all have when we try something new, they are reporting a high level of engagement, a high level of satisfaction. So when we all got our first smartphone or our first tablet, it was a lot of buttons, and maybe lack of buttons in and of itself is kind of, I got a new car this year, and it's all a screen and a panel. If anything electrical goes wrong, I can't move that thing. But it's a learning curve. But after I figured out where all the buttons were and how to turn on my wipers and my headlights and those kinds of things, I'm loving it. But there is that learning curve. Once we get past that, though, lots of great benefits. And as more and more things become technologically advanced, the number of opportunities we have to engage with technology, it just keeps growing. So we've got these abundant opportunities available to us where we have so many options available. And we do kind of have the ability at this point to pick and choose parts we want to use and parts we don't want to use of a variety of different technologies. So the benefits continue to grow as technology advances and as things become more affordable. But on the flip side, there are still a lot of barriers that prevent people from adopting technology. And these are true not just in terms of healthcare, but technology adoption as a whole. A lot of individuals will report a lack of confidence in their abilities to learn how to use the technology, to start using the technology, especially when things are really expensive or we feel like I just paid $1,500 for this phone. What if I push the wrong thing and break it? So that makes a lot of people nervous to try technologies. Similarly, having a lack of experience makes us hesitant to try something new. And I just literally had this conversation with my son this morning. He was talking about his friends playing basketball and he wants to play, but he's not good at it. And he's like, well, they're always practicing. I said, well, how do you think they got good at it? So it's that idea of we are all inexperienced until we practice. And that practice after that learning curve, kind of going back to the left side of the screen, will allow us to get good at using technology. But that lack of experience does sort of cause a lot of folks to shy away from initially adopting. When we're talking about an aging population, we also need to be aware of physical or visual limitations that could prevent folks from adopting technology. And I think this has just traditionally been a problem, or historically, it's been a big problem where the people who are designing technology are fresh out of college, 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds who are designing it for themselves and their buddies, and they're not thinking about older users and what requirements might be. But the places that are doing the best are the ones that realize that those older users are the ones with the money and the ones with the desire, and so if they can figure out how to serve their populations correctly, they're going to have good business. And so the applications, for example, that can increase the size of their font or don't have tiny little buttons and little triggers and things where arthritic fingers might be able to use them more comfortably, those are going to be designs that are going to be adopted more quickly than the ones that have not accommodated for accessibility. The last one, the security concerns, this is a prevailing issue that has existed since as long as technology has been around. I did a study with a graduate student a decade ago. Some of you maybe were even participants. We did it with OLLI and looked at adoption of online technology. And the number one concern we found in that study a decade ago was security concerns. And rightfully so. People want to know when you're participating in anything that is digital. Where is my information going? Who has access to this information? When your physician is asking you to do their online uh, file system or management platform, and you're having all of your data showing up online, are we comfortable with that? And most of them are promising high levels of security, but you do still hear of data breaches. You do hear of places getting hacked and information being stolen. So it is, I think, a legitimate concern that individuals have. And for some, it does prevent them from adopting technology. So these are the types of things, the barriers on the right side of the screen here, that we really need to address and continue to improve if we want to see sort of across the board adoption of technology. Jim, I see you raised a hand.
Yeah, so one of the issues that we see is as we get older, learning becomes harder. Is there any evidence or recommendations about how to deal with that particular issue? I'm not sure whether it's just the age or what, but it seems to be harder for some of our older members to pick up the technology, and maybe it's just that those of us who are a little bit younger have been dealing with it more. But is there a learning issue that goes on, a learning reduction, I guess, as you age, ability to learn? Because you talked about the lack of experience, but I think there's it seems to me it's harder to learn. Is there any evidence to that?
That is a great question. There's certainly literature in, the cognitive aging arena that would say that there are areas in learning that slow with age. There's nothing that stops, nothing that totally reverses, but there are areas that slow, particularly in terms of our fluid intelligence, which is kind of the mechanics. And that is almost exclusively due to things like reaction time. But it does make people feel like they are slower to learn. In terms of the technology adoption literature specifically, there have been numerous studies that have looked at interventions at seeing, how can we teach people of different ages to utilize technology? And most of those studies would show that while older individuals may be a little slower, it's not always a significant difference in terms of their slowness. But it may take a little bit longer or more repetitions. But I would say every single thing I've seen so far has shown that the link between mastering the technology has less to do with learning capability and more to do with motivation. So for individuals that want to, so this all assumes normative cognitive aging. So I'm not talking about individuals with mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease or any type of dementia. Those are special situations. But under normative circumstances, we have seen great success if individuals want to learn. If they're in a research study and they aren't very interested in learning the technology, we do see delays in them picking up adoption. But if they are personally, internally motivated, they are ultimately, maybe after a few more trials or more practice, but ultimately just as good in terms of mastery. But that motivation piece is often what we leave off. So, and I see this with my college students. We were mandated to go online. Everyone was forced to learn Zoom. And some of the students were excited about a new technology. They were excited to do class in their jammies and, not have to, and just literally sit in their beds. And they were excited. They learned Zoom very quickly. Others were so resistant to going online for school, and they hated every aspect of two-dimensional learning, that they would drag their feet on learning anything about Zoom. And so I think when you allow that motivation piece to come in, taking that into consideration, we have not seen adoption issues of technology if it's driven internally by the adopter. Does that answer your question?
It certainly
Kind of
does. It
long-winded.
just gives us some thoughts because of our computer education committee is constantly challenged with getting
Right.
some people. So
It's that idea you can lead a horse to water,
yeah.
But they've got to want to be there and learn that technology. Absolutely. So my last slide here is just kind of our conclusions and implications. So studies like the one we conducted allow us to gain a better understanding of older technology users versus non-users. Tells us a little bit more about the relationship between the biopsychosocial variables and technology usage. And we can learn a little bit more about motivations for and barriers against using technology. And it's only with such a knowledge base that we can really begin to effectively improve our clinical practice, whether that be via planning and implementing future technology-related health interventions, or even the development of new technology. So kind of having an idea of who's using what for what purpose helps us understand where we should go next with the development of the next set of technologies. And at the end of the day, our ultimate goal here, like it always is, we want to conduct studies in gerotechnology so that we can help add to the growing body of knowledge about the factors that contribute to successful aging, which is the one thing we all want. No matter what our age is, that's what our goal is. So that's kind of our hope with this line of research, is to be able to offer some insight into clinicians who are trying to get users to adopt technology so that it can help their health, as well as the developers so that they have informed knowledge when they're creating the next set of technologies. So that is what I have for you. What do you have for me?
Thank you, Dr. Laura. I have Mary Schrein that has a question for you.
Sure.
Now, one of the things that stops us from using it is that we don't have somebody that will help us. For instance, my dermatologist wanted a picture of where the problem was, rather than even getting in touch with me at all. If we could have training of people on how to use the technology, I don't know of any medical place or insurance that will pay for somebody to come and actually help us learn how to do the technology. I think this is really the big void, because we don't have people in our families, for instance, at our fingertips that will say, okay, this is how you do the picture. Or somebody coming in and saying, okay, I'm going to do the photograph for you so that you can go ahead and see your doctor. There's a big void there, plus the cost along with the person being there.
Mm-hmm. That is an excellent, excellent point. Individuals who do have, say, the teenage grandchild at their disposal, who they can say, hey, show me how to use this, do tend to be earlier adopters of technology, because they've got somebody there who can train them to do it. And a lot of people kind of adopt by necessity. For example, my parents adopted pretty quickly because they live across the country and that's the way they see their grandkids. So they were early users of things like FaceTime or Skype. But there was a learning curve and sort of showing people how to do things. And, even on Zoom, everybody figured out how to get on Zoom. And I'm impressed that you even know where those little hands are, because that took me quite a long time to figure out how to raise my hand. It's these little things that if you don't have the hints and the tricks, then it's difficult to figure out how to do it. I've also realized that the majority of help these days, and I put help in my little, bunny ears quotes, comes online in the form of YouTube videos. My children can probably figure out how to change the oil in a car at this point in time because they know how to search things on YouTube and follow a how-to video. That's something that I've learned as an adult. I'm not growing up with that. And I think that, that realization that the way that we learn is generationally based. And we've become with technology, because it's been invented by the younger generation, all the tools associated with training on it are built for that younger generation and the way that they like to learn. And I think that that is a big gap in all of this technology use in the first place. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it. We started when COVID happened, and I had mentioned it in one of my previous talks, in the Aging Studies program. We had a bunch of student interns who all of a sudden couldn't go to their internship sites. And we also realized that we had a whole population of older adults, many who are now isolated in their home, unable to leave because of COVID. So their socialization was out the window. And their best way to connect was through things like Zoom and Skype, but they didn't know how to use those things. They didn't even know how to download them to get them onto their tablet or onto their computer. So we set up a outreach program where all of our interns came together virtually, created instructions for how to get onto Zoom, how to download the application, how to log in, how to set this up. And then we paired these students with some older adults out in the community who were interested in learning but didn't know how. And over the phone, they coached them through it and set it up until they got to a place where they could then talk by Zoom and figure out how to use it. And it has been so successful. We went from a handful of interns and like 20 older adults last spring. We are now partnering with 4 different local organizations, hundreds of older adults, and 25 interns right now, because this has been a continuing desire. So I think, I'm going to take this back to them and suggest that if they want to go another step in the future, that maybe looking at ways to almost be like if there's a way to create a free service, there's like all these helplines for different things. Like, what if you could tap into a college student who could assist with this kind of stuff?
Well, how about Medicare or our own private insurance helping along that line?
I hate to say it, but I've lost hope in them helping on very many things. The more I learn about it, the more discouraged I get. But we'll see. We have a new administration. I don't know what direction things will go in, but I'm hopeful that, with advocacy, these are the kinds of things we may have luck in changing. But I keep telling people, talk to me, I'll tell people, tell everybody you can get to hear that these are issues, and that's how you get your message through.
Thank you, Dr. Laura. Bill Riley?
Yeah. Did your study determine what the barriers to use were, or was that from a more general technology study?
Excellent question. A lot of those came from my previous study, where we specifically asked about barriers to use. So kind of going across studies. Our particular one was more inferred in the current data that I showed you. Our previous study was designed to find out about barriers and benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great
Thank
question.
you, Dr. Laura. Okay, well, I guess that concludes our class for today. If you would like to stay behind and ask a few more questions, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we will consider this class officially closed. So thank you all for attending.
Thank you all so much.
And thank you, Dr. Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And let me make one comment for the OLLI members. So if you need technology help on any topic, in addition to the Friday afternoon help lab, there is a phone number that's on some of the OLLI newsletters that you can call and leave a message, and we will get back with you and try to help you with almost any technology related problem.